every single thing we build, we use ourselves and test ourselves. And if we break it, we feel the pain immediately.
Hey team, Sid here, and this is DevOps Deployed, the show where we take a look at DevOps and cloud infrastructure in the wild. Each week, I interview industry experts about their experience building software systems and the teams behind them. Today, I'm joined by Benjie De Groot. Benjie is the co-founder and CEO of Shipyard, as well as the co-host of the Kubeless podcast. Benjie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sid, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited today to talk about ephemeral environments and how your company, Shipyard, is involved with those. First, we're going to focus a little bit on that topic, and then we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about DevOps and cloud infrastructure at your company and sort of what it's like running a team in the DevOps space, and hopefully take away some lessons learned that the audience can use in their own work. So, can you start by just telling us what Shipyard is?
Sure. Shipyard is an environment management platform at its core, but really what we're focused on right now is that every time a developer makes a commit or pushes a PR, there should be a shareable, secure environment to disseminate out to other developers and also other key stakeholders, so that you kind of get better, faster, stronger deployments. And a big part of that, I have a DevOps back and engineer perspective, is to lower the burden a lot on the DevOps team itself. So that's really what Shipyard's trying to do these days.
Cool. And you mentioned the term ephemeral environments. If anyone in the audience is not familiar, can you just give a quick overview of what that means and why they're relevant in the DevOps space?
Sure. Ephemeral environments. I think it's a state of mind is part of it, and really it's kind of approaching your application as something that in a lot of instances, especially these days, has a lot of microservices, and all of those things kind of encapsulate to form an application. And so ephemeral environment is really a full stack copy of your application that includes state, obviously your code and your changes, and then also third-party integrations. And so that you can actually test fully baked versions of your application before it gets to staging, before it gets to production. And that's really what ephemeral environments are. To be clear, this is not a new paradigm that we're inventing over here. In fact, it's been in use at most of the larger FANG organizations, and more than that, just all the pretty large engineering teams for a long time. And the direct result, at least from our perspective or in our opinion, is that you get much higher quality releases and deployments where you're catching bugs and you're getting important eyeballs on these things before it hits production.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so when customers don't have ephemeral environments, what are they doing instead? What's like the alternative, I suppose?
Yeah, I think we all have dealt with this, and just a little background on myself. I've built out DevOps and environment stuff for longer than I'd like to admit, along with my co-founder Peter, who's the CTO, for a very long time. And we kind of got to a point where, frankly, we were high-priced Kubernetes consultants going into companies of all sizes, large enterprise to just early-stage companies, and basically the answer is bespoke scripts somewhere living in your CI process. So oftentimes in Circle, Argo, all over the place. But you basically have some version of development, some version of staging, and then a production environment. And then sprinkled throughout there's all kinds of other versions of these environments. And a big problem there is keeping them all consistent, maintaining state, all that stuff. And that's all typically done, almost always done by a custom bespoke solution. So when you have a large Google, I don't know how many SREs and DevOps people they have there, but I would guess it's upwards of thousands and thousands at this point. The rest of us don't really have those levels of resources. And also the other side to this, as a DevOps engineer and a formerly high-priced Kubernetes consultant, there's limited resources out there. So even if you had an unlimited budget, finding the talent and people to build out these scripts, typically Bash glued together with a make file, glued together with some cool Argo config stuff. I mean, it's all over the place, and that's kind of the issue that we have right now in the DevOps world, in our opinion.
And so Shipyard helps to sort of bring that together and standardize on I guess a standard to make it easier for teams to achieve that same level of feature.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, really, I think we're all very excited about GitOps. It's just kind of the next level of what we've been building in the DevOps ecosystem for, and we're building on the backs of giants over here, from Puppet to Chef to Ansible, um, frankly, Bash scripts from back in the day on Linodes that I used to do some ugly coordination on. Let's say that nicely. You know, Shipyard is kind of the platform for it. Today, what we use as our application definition, not to get too Shipyard specific, but we use Docker Compose. And the reason we made that choice is because it's very accessible. And the idea is that, sorry, backing up a second, Kubernetes is tough. I think we all know that. And so what ends up happening is that you get into the latest blog post you read about how to implement something might have a large, long-lasting impact. And maybe it was just a flash in the pan, exciting blog post. So like best practices around these things, they're very undefined. I'm not saying that there's only one way, but I am saying that there is kind of a Shipyard way, and we're quite opinionated around that because we think that's part of what's missing. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect of Shipyard, an interesting design choice around using Docker Compose specifically. I think many teams use Docker Compose. Some teams in the cloud native space have started developing directly against their Kubernetes resource definitions, right? Either with a local cluster using Kind, or something like Scaffold to develop directly against a remote cluster. How do you think about that as like an additional step if you need to then go off and define this Docker Compose file? Do you see that as a blocker at all, or what's your mindset on that topic?
I mean, we set out to help eliminate configuration drift. So if you do have an org that is predominantly like well set up in the Helm space and the Kubernetes space and has those resources, and then you have to maintain a Docker Compose file, that doesn't work perfectly. We've actually had a lot of success with that. But the roadmap is kind of us opening this up to Helm and Kubernetes and raw Kubernetes manifest, and probably customized with a K as kind of the early ones for that.
Mm-hmm.
There's some really cool projects. I don't know if you know Dagger and Q. It's a really cool project. So I think that an application definition that can kind of have different targets is on the horizon for us. I don't know what that's going to be. But really, Shipyard's focus right now is giving you the tooling around those environments, from security to maintaining state and stuff like that. So we're somewhat agnostic, while yet extremely opinionated today around Compose. But yeah, it's very much on our minds of like, how can we unify that? Something else I should say is that we do actually have, including ourselves, actually, we have a launch dashboard. So there is a production version of the YAMLs that we generate. And I'm sorry, I didn't mention this. We take Docker Compose and we actually transpile that into best practice Kubernetes manifest. So obviously, underneath the hood, it's all Kubernetes. And what we do offer is, and we have some people using to great success, is basically being able to deploy those raw manifests on the remote infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say, we're not trying to be too prescriptive long term, but right now we're kind of trying to stop the bleeding, if you will, of all these DevOps teams that are trying to figure things out. And you'd be surprised how many people out there use Docker Compose and some combination of that with like Fargate or God knows what for production. And so unifying an application definition is something that we hope that the industry, and we hope to be a help with that kind of comes to in the next 3 or 4 years, maybe.
Yeah, many of the teams that I work with they do deploy to Kubernetes, but still use Docker Compose locally. So I think that is what many people on the bell curve, that is the current state of the world. And so I think it's a reasonable choice. I just wanted to think or hear your thoughts on that kind of future state as more and more people develop directly against Kubernetes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all about it. I will say that we're big fans of K3S. So um, my personal favorite local flavor is probably K3D versus Kind. No offense to
Mm-hmm.
the Kind folks, but I just had to give a little pro tip there, or my perspective. Haven't used Minikube in years. I've heard it's gotten significantly better, but it can be quite heavyweight depending on your laptop. So yeah,
That makes sense.
we'll
And
go
what
with that.
types of workloads are best suited for this process? I mean, like the canonical one is this long-lived web service where you make a feature branch with some change in it. This deploys an ephemeral environment that either other developers can see or maybe a product manager can see. Does it Are there other workloads beyond that this makes sense for?
So I think so in the long term. One other use case that we're seeing a lot of that we're really excited about, and we're calling it right now testing before merge. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but basically end-to-end tests on these PRs is saving a lot of time for a bunch of our customers. So the typical workflow that we've seen has been, you promote these environments, forgetting putting ephemeral environments aside, development, staging, production. A lot of people test off of staging. Maybe there's a testing environment. But the reality is that those end-to-end tests are running. Cypress, Maple, Playwright, whatever, Selenium, are running at that right before deploy, and oftentimes there's a lot of PRs mixed into one, and
Mm-hmm.
so you kind of get into this last minute hair on fire situation where you need to get one feature out, the other one's not that important, but you're not sure which one is breaking the end-to-end test. And I hate to say this, but you shift left. I sound like a VC, but you shift left the tests, and that's another really awesome use case that's saving people a lot of time. And ultimately, that's what Shipyard's about. It's trying to make the developers and DevOps specifically life a lot easier and faster and stronger.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you linked me to a site beforehand called ephemeralenvironments.io.
Correct.
What is that, and can you tell me a little bit about it?
So it's just a little community site that we started to put together. Over the last 2 years, I've gone around and talked a lot about ephemeral environments and the power of them. And over time, a lot more people are talking about this stuff, which is great. There's other people working on these problems, but there is no unified resource around what are ephemeral environments, what are the best practices around them, and there's some tricky stuff in there because remember the whole goal here is to get as production like as possible. But also, there's security stuff that you really want to be on top of. And again, state is a huge problem with ephemeral environments. So understanding how that works, and then also once you have these things in place, how can you use them as a team? So it's just a community website, pull requests welcome, where people can kind of figure out some best practices, and as an industry, we can all kind of contribute the learnings that we've had. It stems from interviews with a bunch of people over the last year or so, maybe. There's a bunch of quotes on the top from some of those people. We have a lot more to add as well in the coming months. So that's just a community resource. And again, pull requests welcome.
And developing a product where your primary customer is developers and people who are very technical, have you found, I guess you may have not run a company where your audience is general public, but what is unique about having that audience as your primary customer in building and running a company like Shipyard?
There's a lot of unique things when building a company for developers. My background is I am the CEO of the company, but that's just because my co-founder is 10x the engineer that I am, so I kind of got the short end of the stick, and I also talk a lot, so that helps. But I can say some of my best friends are DevOps, and I'm a DevOps person as well. We can be a little prickly. We can be a little opinionated. And
No,
so,
no.
yeah, a little bit sometimes. So having conversations around, hey, this amazing bespoke thing you built 3 years ago, which is really cool, very specific to your thing, doesn't have as many features as we do. And it's kind of like causing you more pain than it's worth at this point. Those can be difficult conversations, figuring out how to communicate that and rally uh, our colleagues around versus making them feel like we're trying to take away something. That's been a fun challenge, but frankly, we've had a lot of success with that. And you know, I will say that on the scale of winning people over with Shipyard, at the very bottom is VC. Like I don't like whatever. Um, and then you go up the line and like, oh, a product person thinks this is great. Awesome. Oh, a QA engineer thinks this is great. Oh, okay. Now I'm starting to feel like some validation here. A developer likes this. Okay. All right. We're on to something. And then the DevOps person getting on a call with me. They don't even have to like it, but just getting on a call with me, I'm over the moon every time. Because it's a hard bar to pass that. And I say it with love and respect, and also with self awareness, a little bit of self awareness that I am exactly the same way. Um, I don't have too much experience in consumer products, but I will say that one thing that's been super positive is early on we had some amazing design partners, and having kind of that direct communication with them and them being like, this is broken or I really need to do this, and solving those problems kind of in a 15-minute call, and then going out and implementing them quickly and seeing that tight feedback loop. That's super rewarding as well. Like when you're building out a feature that's a really hard thing to do, and the other person actually completely understands how hard it is very rewarding. Versus, sometimes people are like, well, why isn't this button that color and do this like really easy thing? And you're like, you don't understand what that means. I have to change my pipeline. Like, right. Whereas with a DevOps person, they're like, okay, this circle orb that we have, can we just tweak that to have this API call do that? And we're like, yeah, no problem. And like, we go heads down for a day and we come back with this feature, and they're like, oh man, that's great. Oh, this is cool. Your platform's killing it, blah, blah, blah. So that's been great. So I think that I'm guessing you don't get that when you're building out Facebook or Instagram. But maybe you do. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Now, before we shift to talking more about the infrastructure behind Shipyard, are there any either recent or upcoming features that you're particularly excited about at Shipyard.Build?
I mean, one thing to keep in mind about all of this, and this actually is a good segue into the next thing, is that the coolest thing about Shipyard, from my personal perspective, is that it's kind of the ultimate dog food. Um, every single thing we build, we use ourselves and test ourselves. And if we break it, we feel the pain immediately. So that we have a extra tight feedback loop over here. It's been a really great tool for recruiting. So I'm kind of excited about everything always. One thing I'll highlight though is we're working and releasing what we're calling the timeline, not the timeline dashboard. We're calling it just the timeline deployed view. And one thing that we've kind of noticed, and maybe this is taking the wraps off of something that I maybe shouldn't be spoiling, but it's fine, is living in kubectl. Oh, sorry, real quick, Sid. I have to ask, kubectl or kube control?
I actually jump back and forth depending on the sentence.
All right. Well, I'm a kubectl guy. I think the irony of having a tool for a DevOps person that has the word cuddle in it is just too amazing for me to pass up. So I'm a strong kubectl. I just want to put my flag in the ground there. But when you're running kubectl, and I know you have a pretty technical audience, a lot of it is looking at kubectl itself, or sorry, pods. Like watching the deployment happening, container crash loop back off, that type of thing. And one of the missing things and a problem for our customers and a problem for ourselves is like, where did the deploy fail? So we're actually, it's an internal feature. We hope to actually open source this. This might be one of our first open source things that we're going to contribute back. But having an an interface for seeing that deployment and then being able to go back in history, kind of like the inspect in Chrome, the inspect timeline view for when you're loading the network stuff, but that for actually turning on an application, because a lot of the things that we help our customers deal with is dependencies, and then the timing of those dependencies. And I don't know why Postgres turned on the fifth time it tried, but it did. So great. Well, we're trying to operation or actually have data around that. So being able to click back and see like, oh, at this point Postgres started working. Oh, the application was loaded, or oh, the application ran its migration. Then Postgres was ready, and then that made a worker start being available, or something to that degree. So online view is really exciting, I think.
Is that like an aggregation of both like Kubernetes events across generations of the resource plus logging, or like what's feeding into that?
Yeah, that's exact. That's a much more concise description of what it is.
Awesome.
And a GUI for it, and an
Yeah.
interface for it. Because I think that one thing that, again, as a DevOps person myself, but also for developers and other people that might not have the same CLI experience, I think that bringing tools like that that are easily accessible are going to enable developers to debug issues and free up DevOps resources. So they're not kind of being an SRE for every environment all the time. And they're kind of starting to focus really on their SLOs and SLIs on production, and not, hey, my kind cluster didn't work for some reason, or my application doesn't start locally, but it does start remotely, or whatever. Enabling people to have the tools to debug this themselves, and kind of having like an easy an interface between developers and DevOps configuration deployment stuff, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. No, I think that sounds super exciting. Let's shift into talking a little bit about the infrastructure that's powering all this on the back end. Can you talk me through the kind of tech stack and architecture? And maybe a good way to frame that is like the customer journey of, if I go onto your website and sign up for a new account, what's happening behind the scenes? Where's that going? What cloud services are we touching? Maybe walk me through that user journey.
Sure. Well, that's always evolving for multiple reasons. But where we are
Of
today
course.
is underneath everything is obviously Kubernetes. We're big Kubernetes people. You mentioned at the beginning, I'm a co-host with Mark from Replicated of KubeList. Not to not to shield my own podcast on your thing.
Toot away.
But very big. While today Shipyard is not an open source company, we are huge users of open source software, and we do our best to contribute. I'm a huge CNCF fanboy, for lack of a better word. So a lot of what we do is underpinned by all the amazing work that CNCF and Kubernetes ecosystem and just everybody's doing, and Linux Foundation and all of them. So Kubernetes is underneath the hood. From a cloud perspective, we currently are using AWS and GCP. For every one of the organizations that we have a single tenant model. Opinionated soapbox for a second. If you're sharing namespaces with people or things that you don't know, I love RBAC, it's great, but you're just a CVE away from disaster with being able to escape. So we believe in using, and virtualization isn't perfect either. Believe me, I know. I remember Heartbleed. But we use virtualization as kind of as one of the security layers we have. So every one of our customers gets their own cluster, and those are either EKS or GKE clusters, or I don't care, I'll just tell you, K3S clusters. We're getting really into K3S and getting all kinds of amazing performance. And the folks over at Rancher, I just can't say enough good stuff about K3S. It's pretty spectacular.
Have you looked at Civo at all as a K3S provider?
We haven't. I have it on the radar. I haven't had a chance to look at that. Do you have any pro tips around that?
I had someone from their team on the show not too long ago. Essentially, they're all in on K3S as a managed service. So they're offering hosted Kubernetes clusters, all focused on K3S. So could be something to look into.
Yeah, I might follow up with you about that after.
And their main sort of one of their main selling points is that the spin up time is just so much faster. So they can provision you a cluster from scratch. I think their quoted time is 90 seconds, which compared to an EKS cluster is pretty darn good.
Yeah, that were magnitudes different there. K3S is spectacular. From a perspective of trying to get shipyard tooling to as many people as possible, it's been a godsend for us to find a way to keep costs down while maintaining our security posture. Um, so in regards to stack, Python, Go, um, maybe a little Rust is coming, but probably not anytime soon. It's just like I just want to do that. Then React, Redux on the front end, um, bunch of Redis all over the place. Um, we use Celery. I love Celery, but when you're doing build pipelines, you really got to know what you're doing there. So we've learned some hard lessons. Um, yeah, all kinds of stuff. But really, again, just leaning on the backs of giants. Kiniko for build stuff, we do a bit of that in some places. Yeah.
And so supporting both GKE and EKS right now is the primary reason there that your customers wanted to keep their data within their cloud of choice. So if I am already on AWS, I want my ephemeral environments there as well.
I feel like I shouldn't actually answer this question, but I'm going to because no one can pay attention. No, it's biggest factor in all of that is free credits, free credits for startups.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it just so happens that when you're building a very, very native Kubernetes thing and making it as portable as possible, it's actually kind of a good forcing function to keep us very flexible. So yes, we do have customers that have specific policies around, oh, we only let stuff be in AWS. Haven't run into that with GCP folks yet, but really it's kind of from the get-go, we want to be as portable as possible. Sorry, we use Terraform to provision our clusters across every type of technology. We're in a pretty good space to be able to spin up anything that you want anywhere you want. One thing I should mention is that we host all the ephemeral environments right now. That's kind of been something that most customers have wanted. We've definitely run into some issues where people are looking for other solutions, and we do have that capability. So that's another reason to just kind of keep ourselves very nimble and kind of hold ourselves to the standard of really being cloud agnostic, with the exception of our Terraform modules. But it's okay, we can maintain a few Terraform modules. And actually, looking forward to potentially getting some stuff going on DigitalOcean soon, and probably Azure as well.
Cool. So if I echo back what I heard, if I'm a new customer, I go sign on, I connect my GitHub to Shipyard via a GitHub app. Uh, Once I push to a feature branch, the sort of the sequence of events is it a Terraform apply is called, which spins up a cluster. Then I transpile my Docker Compose into a set of Kubernetes YAML files. Does Terraform also apply those, or are those applied separately via a
We
pipeline
yeah we
somewhere?
yeah we do that separately via pipeline, and then also we give everybody their own cluster, and then we kind of like have our own auto scaling mojo there to try and keep costs somewhat low. That's kind of for the free tier that we have, and then if you are kind of using the more featureful, support heavy SLA version, that's always going to be on EKS or GKE, at least for now.
Got it. And then one piece that I didn't hear anything about is database seed data. How is that managed? Is there any special magic fairy dust to help get data into a state where we can have a testable interface? Or is that on the end
So
user?
so the magic fairy dust is the DevOps person setting up the first environment. Um, that being said, we do a lot of really cool data snapshotting stuff. So every
Okay.
time you create a new environment, and just this is how it works today. Again, we went a little crazy with the Docker Compose transpilation thing, but the idea is that if it works locally, it's going to work remotely. So if you have a named volume in your Compose file, we see that and we think a few things. Like one, you want to probably persist that data. Two, you're probably going to want to be able to move that data around and possibly use it in multiple environments, but individual copies of it. And then three, like multiple services might need to use that same volume, which is actually non-trivial to do. I'm sure you're aware. So we kind of handle that for you, and we give you these instant snapshottings. And it's kind of like the Git branching model, but for data volumes that we just automatically apply. And it gives you a lot of power. So you do have to maintain your main development environment is kind of how a lot of people look at that. And then automatic snapshots are taken on the fly and then applied. And so you can test your data migrations, you can do all kinds of stuff. And then when you roll it back in, everything's good. And obviously roll back the prior snapshots and some other stuff. Actually, call back. We're also going to be releasing our data dashboard that's like a much more robust version of how to move the data around in the next month or so. So that's exciting as well. So I had to call that one out too. Very excited about that.
Nice. And as you've built out this product, are there any interesting, or what are the most interesting technical challenges as you've built and scaled and had customers start to actually interrogate this thing and work with this within their workflows?
Interrogate's a good word for what our customers like to do to us. No, but understandably, like we sit in a really critical path for the software development lifecycle. I think that so the data stuff. I'm not going to get into specifics because some of that mojo is really cool. Figuring that out was easily the biggest, bestest. Like Peter and I staring at each other's eyes, being like, "Did that just work? I can't wait. That's not working." We had an early customer that, for whatever reason, had 100 gigabyte Postgres databases, and at any given time, I don't know, they had 40 or 50 environments running. So we had to instantly snapshot 100 gigabyte databases and then move them around and all kinds of stuff. And once we kind of figured out how to do that, which took a lot of pain, that was the coolest thing. But overarchingly, I mean, I said it before, we're really on the backs of giants. I mean, I've been doing DevOps and this stuff for a very long time, and I built I mean, I don't even think this is fair to say, but I've built somewhat of a version of Kubernetes on Linode in Bash scripts in 2000 something. Um, Kubernetes is the dream. All this tooling that we have, it's the dream. We've all been waiting for this. Jaeger is the dream. Distributed tracing, like understanding this stuff is the dream. Um, Now it's kind of coalescing into tools such as Shipyard that can actually make it easy to use. But just like the coolest thing I think about building Shipyard is we have a problem and it's like, okay, what's the right way to do this? And then we're like, okay, how can we use Kubernetes and the CNCF tooling to do it? And pretty much every time we look, someone's got an amazing project that is doing it the way that at least I think it should be done, or that I've dreamed of doing it. From really cool eBPF stuff that we use to I don't know, just everything. I just can't talk enough about how awesome the CNCF stuff is, and how cool it is to build on top of that. Trying to think of any other particularly cool things besides the data piece. Orchestrating all these clusters is real fun, and keeping them healthy is interesting. I definitely will say, one other thing I'll say is that I don't think I realized how many problems various nodes have at the cloud level until I really started seeing, yeah, let's just say like nodes fail, and not just spot instances, like just nodes, like network stops working all of a sudden, hard drives die. So I can only imagine what the folks over at AWS and GCP and Azure deal with. But I think we're starting to get a little bit of a taste of that. And so engineering around that has been fun and challenging as well. And we're not all the way there yet, but we're making great strides.
Yeah, recently I've been running into with one of my clients a bug in the GKE autoscaler that just causes it to stop auto scaling. And so it's been interesting to try to go as far as I can because I don't actually see the internals of that tool. I can only see some symptoms from behind the abstraction, and so it's been interesting dialogue with their support team to try to understand, hey, why is this happening? And I'm sure you run into
Yeah.
stuff like that at scale.
Yeah, and one other thing that's related to your last question that I think is interesting is we made an early investment in like internal telemetry, and I can't tell you how important that is for exactly what you're just describing. You don't always know, like it's not always your fault, or it's always your fault, but it's not always the service like engineering around your dependencies to like know like without actually knowing like what's going on and having a workaround has been something super valuable to us. We're always on that, so it has helped us a lot, and that's another big advantage that I think we have given ourselves to support this stuff at scale.
Let's shift and talk a little bit about team and operating a company like Shipyard. Currently, how big is the team, and what's the breakdown in terms of technical versus non-technical, management versus ICs? Just would love to hear kind of an overview of how the company is structured.
Sure. Well, we're definitely still learning. We've only been around for about a year and a half now as a company. Um, we have five full-time engineers. We've got well, actually, we've got a lot of. So we're really fortunate. We have some amazing contract part-time people from around the world. It's just very fortunate to have some really talented people that we were kind of able to leverage. On the engineering side, that's where we've invested most of our time and money. We're about 10 people total, not including some of these contractors. But I would say it's about 70% engineering, and then we have some operations and some marketing support, and we have to start to grow out the other aspects of the team, which we're actively doing and actively hiring. Come check out our hiring page at any time, Shipyard.Build. Um, somewhere, I don't know, or whatever. Yes, come work here. So yeah, yeah. So that's how we're currently set up right now.
And as I mean, you're still relatively young company, only 10 people. Have you found that in the growth from just you and your co-founder up to 10, were there any things that started to break down? I think at that scale, most things in the startups I've worked with, you can still have pretty loose process and like information flows where it needs to go. Are there any interesting examples where you've had to define process more explicitly to account for this growth and the sort of the increasing number of communication paths amongst the team?
Oh yeah, definitely. We're constantly iterating on that. I mean, one thing is that having support, because as I mentioned, we're sitting in this critical path of the software development lifecycle for a lot of companies. So figuring out how to do support in a structured way, also having the right tooling for the various people that are on support. That's definitely been a constant process thing that we're iterating on. Um, the other thing, and again, this gets a little inception recursive-y, but your audience can your audience knows what all those things mean better than I do. So when we figure out how to run our Cypress tests on our ephemeral environments, we're solving problems for ourselves, but we're also solving problems for our customers. So again, this like dog food aspect has actually made it so that when we do figure out process, you know, we can kind of give an opinionated way of like, hey, this is a really good way to do things. And we're starting to try and disseminate that out a bit through our blog and through some of the other outreach that we're starting to do. So yeah, so process has definitely become more and more important to us. Um, but I like to balance that with not having so many meetings and stuff like that. Again, I'm a developer, so you know, I have a lot of empathy. Call out to Holly, who heads up our marketing efforts, for wrangling me to get me to do marketing things. You know, it's never gonna be a problem to get my attention for like some engineering architecture conversation, but like, you know, getting me to send Sid a bio, for example, that I didn't really do until last night. That is a good example of things that I don't love doing. So, um, you know, I think it's a balance. I don't know if we found it, but we're working on that. And again, I'm really fortunate to have some awesome advisors and friends in the community that have kind of helped us figure out and get a head start on how to do that.
And I think you mentioned something important there around being able to offer an opinionated approach to tackling some of these technical problems that through your dog fooding you're able to roll out within the product. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I see in the cloud native space is, as you mentioned, there's all of these amazing tools that provide capabilities, but how to choose amongst them and figure out the best combination of them and having an opinionated approach to using them is like the hard part, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Um, I mean, look, having the mental model of how an application works is a challenge in and of itself. Then figuring out how to tool all those different environments is a challenge. Building out the application, like it's just there's a lot of stuff here that we do, and ultimately it comes down to Peter and I were building the same thing over and over again, and it was great, but I'm a programmer. Like I like once I do the same thing 2 times, I start getting that itch in the back of my spine, and I'm like, oh god, this feels dirty. I need to build something to do this for me, and that's ultimately what Shipyard where it kind of comes from. And yeah, I just think that the tools are kind of ahead of where of the ability of people to use the tools. And that is kind of the gap that we're trying to bridge a bit with Shipyard and make it accessible. And there's also we didn't touch on this. And by the way, for auto scaling stuff, we haven't implemented it internally yet, but we played with it and we're super impressed. Carpenter, do you know the Carpenter
Carpenter,
project?
yeah, it looks
Yeah,
super cool.
yeah,
Relative to the AWS, the current approach for
right.
EKS, where you have to provision a node group, an auto scaling node group for each machine type you want,
Yeah.
is yeah, a challenge.
I don't I have no insight here, but I'm hoping that Carpenter expands to stuff outside of AWS soon, and then that's when I think it's going
It,
to. I'm not
it's
really sure,
built
but
it's built
I
in
just
such a way that it should be able to.
yeah. There's a video where the guy I think behind Carpenter explains it with like buckets and like
Yeah,
boxes. It's
Justin
terrific.
Garrison.
You should check that out. I'll try and yeah. Anyways, we're off topic here, but why did I start talking about Carpenter? I don't even know what that was not a prompt that you gave me there. Big fan of a lot of open source projects is the point. Um, but I think that the big thing to keep in mind is like with all of this, there's so much out there. Um, you people should be focusing on building the applications, not their internal tooling. That's really what it comes down to from our perspective.
100% agree. And as we wrap up here, are there any sort of lessons learned from your time building and running either these bespoke ephemeral environments or this company now that is offering this as a service that you can bundle up into some nuggets of wisdom for the audience if they're either early DevOps engineers building out a team or maybe thinking about going off and building a SaaS product for developers like this themselves?
Yeah, I'll start off with a plea. Um, please, fellow DevOps brothers and sisters in arms, um, let's stop making our lives so miserable by not standardizing. Even if it's not Shipyard, we just got to standardize a little bit. Like we all know this is ridiculous. What we've been doing to ourselves. Um, that being said, I think that the biggest lesson that I learned is community is really hard to figure out. It's in my head. I still think I'm struggling or I'm still learning. Not struggling is not the right word. So before you set out once you're trying to get before you're trying to get customers, you got to understand what it is you think that you're trying to solve and how to communicate around that. And just early and often get feedback from your peers. Have as many conversations as you can. Try and validate that you're actually working on a problem that people need solving with. A particular example of this is that when Shipyard first started, it was like a code review tool because I was like, this is great. You can do code reviews without having to blow away your local environment. That's the only thing that matters. Um, Turns out most developers um, don't really think that that's a problem. Um, and luckily, I talked to a bunch of developers and we figured that out. I still wanted to build this environment management platform. And we do have lots of developers using it for code review. Don't get me wrong; they do basic UAT on it. Um, but turns out that testing and getting earlier access for various stakeholders at a company is actually much more important. And the way we found that out is through conversation. So I really think the biggest piece of advice I can give is have conversations early and often, be transparent, be honest, say, hey, I want to do something. I'm excited about this. What are your priorities? I think that's really important. Another lesson, uh, if you're raising money, be careful who you take money from. We have been unbelievably fortunate with our investors, but I know a lot of friends and a lot of horror stories um, where all money's not the same. You know, like if you have someone that's going to try and drive you towards something that's not really what your vision is, you know, you're going to be dealing with this person for 7 years if you're successful. So be judicious about who and when you take money. And then also another, again, see, you can tell I'm a CEO now. But another thing is be careful of these crazy valuations. I think we're seeing this. We're recording this right now. We're on day 14 of this situation in Ukraine. It's horrible. But obviously, the market is crazy. A lot of friends I have kind of raised a whole bunch of money, pre-product, crazy valuation, and now they really have a real problem because now the market's going to turn down. So really what I'm saying here is have conversations as many as early as often as possible. Ask questions. Assume you're wrong. I always feel like I'm wrong going into this stuff, or I don't know something. Be careful who you take money from, and also don't be greedy with the dollar value. It's your partnership that matters. It's not about money. It's not. It's about having the right people to help you build this because there's going to be ups and downs, and you want to have that support system in place, and it really makes a difference.
Awesome. So any final call to action? Should we send them to Shipyard.Build?
Yeah, come try it out. Shipyard.Build. Again, ephemeralenvironments.io is the other big one. Pull requests welcome, questions welcome. And yeah, and reach out. And again, we're still figuring out what the real problems are. So if we talk about something that tickled your interest, please reach out to me. Um, or if you're like, oh my God, this guy has got it all wrong. I know how to do it. I want to hear, always open to a conversation. And that's how we learn and that's how we make the product better.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Benjie. It's been a pleasure. Fun to hear about Shipyard, the infrastructure behind it, and the team that's building it. Take care.
Thank you, Sid. Thanks for the time.